On this week's edition of Original Beater, we have a Sears turn of the century made by Emerson, or TOC, or TOC for short. This is the very first iteration of the turn of the century. This model was introduced sometime in the late 70s. I imagine it was very expensive new because these are somewhat rare, actually. You do not see very many of these pop up. So when you do see one, it's a nice little treat. This one has the K63 in it. And it's not just any K63. No. It's a blender K63. The thick, big K63. So, now this fan is interesting also because this was one of Emerson's very first residential fans after they discontinued production of the Roundnose in 1965, I think. So, they had to make something other than their heat fan. They wanted something for a residential setting, so all they did was they took a heat fan, gave it wood blades, and put a housing on top like a hat. Speaking of housing, yeah, look at that huge protrusive top plate. It's freaking massive. The top of the motor is here, and up above here is the lower canopy for basically a heat fan. So yeah, but they took a blender and literally put this silly plastic housing on it like a hat. Very, very crude, but that's what they had at the time. In the early 80s, they actually started making... Or actually, in the very late 70s, they actually started making, you know, different decorative, quote-unquote, residential models with different housing designs that looked more or less, you know, integrated, instead of something they kludged together, as seen here. This fan is 3 speeds. It is, of course, not reversible. The motor is a 2-speed K63. The 3rd speed is provided via a resistor on the level layer pull chain, as seen. I can't get a good view of it. As seen there. So anyway, let's see how this thing performs. Run it to low speed. Yeah, a lot of the manufacturers it only had 2-speed motors in the late 70s into the early 80s. Fasco had 2-speed, Emerson was 2-speed, Universal Motors were 2-speed. So they would get the 3rd speed by adding either a capacitor, paralleling it off the medium let me rephrase that. They'd take a capacitor, they would tap it into the low speed leg of the motor, and then give it a third speed. This one uses a resistor. Fasco also used resistors because Fasco was weird and they liked things archaic. All the way into the 90s. But anyway, the low speed on this fan is, again, borderline aesthetic. It's kind of your average low speed, really. It's slow, but it's functional. So that's all nice and good. Anyway, yummy. Wooden father's wooden. Yeah, so this is a plastic housing, similar to the other plastic Emersons sold at Sears, with the round vents, with a metal bottom plate bolted onto it. The switch housing, of course, is metal. So yeah, I want to think that this design may have been introduced as early as, say, 76 or 77, maybe 77. Like I said, they kind of just scrambled and kludged something together once Casablanca started rolling out their first functional fans, being the Victorian and the Zephyr. So, yeah. Emerson is a kludgy company. Anyway, let's go to medium. Got a bit of a hop to it. Now, the medium speed on here is interesting. It's fast. It's actually more like a medium high on a lot of other fans. And the bushing, the nylon bushing between the switch housing shaft and the flywheel is, of course, in need of grease, so it's a little wobbly. That's kind of typical for these. Now, mounting these fans was also interesting. This was another kludgy practice from Emerson. Basically, what they wanted you to do, they just assumed that all houses or all installations which have a box directly affixed to a joist. So they're like, oh, just put this J-hook through the center of the box, right? So you have a J-hook in the middle of the box, going into a wood joist, because everything's wood, remember. So, then the canopy would, since there's no mounting bracket down to the box, alright, the canopy would be affixed to the box via two long 832 screws with little brass thumb nuts or finial nuts on the bottom. Very, very kludgy. And then the bottom of the J-hook yoke would protrude from the canopy. Now, instead of a normal bell canopy, Emerson had to be weird. They just had to be weird. See, I'm already feeling the air now. And by the way, the blade pitch on this fan is 15 degrees. And these are wood blades. Now, this is another oddity, and another thing that proves that Emerson really was kind of kludging things together here, right? The heat fans had 15-degree blade irons. Later on, the 52-inch heat fans did. Later on, all or most of the residential fans had 13-degree irons. Okay? The 36-inch heat fans had 13-degree irons, but those are kind of irrelevant. You'd think, oh, just put 13s on here and drop the value because it's a residential setting. Nope, let's go with 15 degrees. Now, did they drop the capacitor value in this? I'm not sure. I am honestly not sure if they did or not because I have not opened this just yet to find out. Anyway, let's go to... Yeah, I think they might have dropped the value to 4 microfarads from the stock 5. I had a motor for one of these years ago when I was a kid. Regretfully, I got rid of it. But it had a 4 microfarad capacitor, whereas the 52-inch heat fans had a 5. I'm thinking maybe that was their way of slowing the fan down a little bit with the wood blades, but it isn't very slow. It's high speed, screaming fast, at least 220 RPM. So, and with the 15-degree blade pitch, this is on par with the Hunter Original. Again, original beater. I think, oh, originals move the most air. 15-degree blade pitch, yay! Yeah, this is right up next to it, if not exceeding it slightly. So, look at that protrusive K63. No, it's not hidden. It's all out. It's out for everyone to see. Plain view. Another thing worth noting here is that the flywheel is of the tapered variety. The tapered shape seen on earlier heat fans. In the late 70s, they started rolling out flat and non-tapered flywheels. So, shows its age just a little bit, but then again, it also could be old stock. Really hard to tell. Yeah, the flywheel, not the flywheel, the switch housing is vibrating a little bit, but it's not as loud as the plastic ones, at least, so, I mean, yay. And we let it coast. Of course, if you're familiar with K63 motors, you know the bearings tend to be on their way out, because ball bearings by nature have a finite lifespan, and K63s at this point are at the minimum 40 years old. So, no, that's not true. 39 years old, because the last ones were around in 1980 for the most part. So, yeah, the bearings are starting to go on most of these, and also these motors run hot. So that's another thing that leads to bearing failure. These motors run extremely hot, almost General Electric hot. They were pretty inefficient. I think this motor pulls, 1.5 amps on high, which is very high for a residential fan. But then again, these were really designed for industrial use, not necessarily residential. So, I mean, it is what it is. So, there you have it. An Emerson, no, a Sears turn of the century made by Emerson. I hope you enjoyed.